Hello, my name is Hassan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast. Bonus. There's no book reading on these bonus episodes. Instead, these are interviews, rants, raves, audio insights, and musings, and even conversations that I've documented or had about leadership. Because listening to a literature podcast about leadership is still better than reading and trying to understand yet another business book. And of course, listening to a literature podcast about leadership might even save Western civilization. And wouldn't it be cool to be a part of that? Introduction. When we think about leadership, we think about a new year. And when we think about a new year, we of course think about resolutions, right? And when we think about resolutions, we think about how we move forward. We think about how we must take stock of where we came from in the previous year and what we have accomplished. Now, one of the things that we tend to do, leaders and other people, is that, we create these resolutions at the beginning of the year based on past behavior from the previous year. Now, these resolutions tend to be articulated as confessions. If we haven't done what we know we should have done as leaders in the previous year, our resolutions tend to be colored by the following language. I confess that I wasn't good enough to my employees. I confess that I wasn't as great a leader as I could have been. I confess that I made mistakes. I confess that I should have cared more about my people as a leader. I confess, I confess, I confess. And then, of course, after all the confessing, we make a commitment to do better in the new year. And then we proceed to do pretty much the same thing in the new year after about a month or two of really, genuinely trying to do better. This leads inevitably, of course, to us falling backwards into a rut of failure, missed opportunities, and, of course, for those of us who still possess a conscience, regret and guilt. And then, of course, December 31st of the next year comes around, and we're back to a state of, confession. Wouldn't it be nice to figure out a way out of that enormous year-long journey around that and within that leadership cul-de-sac? Well, one way to get out of that cul-de-sac is by reading and by studying the great books of literature, which is what we do on this podcast. A great books reading list for 2023. In 2022, we read everything from Dostoevsky to Jane Austen, from John Steinbeck to Jack Kerouac on this podcast. Coming up in 2023, we'll be reading more from those authors, of course, but also we will be reading from Virginia Woolf, Joan Didion, and even Pearl S. Buck. We will look at the work of Chinua Achebe and examine how things fall apart and come back together, while also examining what leaders can learn, what leaders can glean from the narratives of former U.S. slaves. We have received feedback on this podcast that we are missing understanding leadership deeply without tackling Shakespeare, so we are going to respond to that feedback by reading 4 of his major plays, including Othello and King Lear, The Taming of the Shrew, and, of course, Hamlet. We will continue, as we did in 2022, to read about military leadership, and we are going to read about it from the mouth of the great German strategist von Clausewitz, all the way to the Russian grand strategist Leo Tolstoy. And we will even cover on this podcast in 2023 the ancient books of Kings and Chronicles, from that book upon which the entire edifice of Western civilization itself rests, the Bible. Finally, to wrap up in 2023, we will read and analyze the epic hero's journeys that stands as one of the finest documents in all of English literature, chronicling the good, the bad, and the positively ugly of walking the leadership path. J.R.R. Tolkien's saga, The Lord of the Rings. One ring to rule them all, indeed. In between all of these books, we will have interviews, we'll have conversations, and we'll sprinkle bonus book selections from Booker T. Washington, Geoffrey Chaucer, D. Brown, Willa Cather, and Mark Twain. And in the summer of 2023, we will revisit the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, and the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist Papers. These were the most downloaded conversations, most downloaded episodes of 2022, and the founding documents of a nation-state like the United States of America always bear revisiting for leaders every single year. We'll do all of this work, we'll do all of this analysis, we'll do all of this reading with a great list of co-hosts and guests, including several folks returning to the mic from last year, including R.J. St. John, Ryan Stout, Libby Unger, Moomin Kazi, DeRollo Nixon, John Hill, a.k.a. Small Mountain, and, of course, our outstanding semi-regular co-host, Tom Libby. But what does all this have to do with confession and resolution? Lessons from reading the great books. Reading great books, listening to great conversations about those books, and expanding our leadership minds and our leadership ingrained patterns past the narrow band of seeking justification, explanation, or permission to behave in the ways we know we should with the people that we are leading is one way out of the confession cul-de-sac. Another way of getting out of that cul-de-sac is to just stop confessing. Just stop. Just stop with the confession that we call at the end of the year making resolutions. Instead, as a leader, move towards commitment. Commitment to take action. Commitment to engage. Commitment to do the things and taking the actions that we know we should do for our people, for the ones who are following us and for the ones who look to us for guidance. Commitment is better even than reading, though reading always leads to encouragement, and encouragement always leads to commitment. As was said in 2021 on an early episode of this podcast by a guest, leaders are readers, and leaders who are readers take action. Sure, you can read Virginia Woolf and you can read Joe Didion, as we're going to do this month on the podcast. You can read W.E.B. Du Bois, and you can always, of course, read more Dostoevsky. As a matter of fact, I would recommend it. You can read all day. But if you don't act, if you don't take action as a leader, if you don't commit, then reading and absorbing, taking notes in the margins, arguing with the author, and leaving blood in the gutters, well, all that results in is just more endless internal confessing. Or what Mrs. Podcast host would dismiss as, quote-unquote, navel-gazing. There are steps, for those of you who would like to hear bulleted lists, for taking action. And so here are the steps to taking action this year that we will be addressing via our book reading this year. Make a plan. That's typically the first step. Take action is the second step. Analyze what worked and what didn't. Do more of what worked, and then repeat. Conclusion. The link to our reading list for 2022 is in the show notes just below the player. Our reading list for 2023 is being finalized, and the link to that list will be below the podcast player in subsequent episodes of this podcast this year. I'd encourage you to pick up the books and to read along this year as we talk to our guests. But no matter what you decide to do, let's not commit to confession with our reading this year. Let's not commit to resolution. Instead, in this year, let us commit to taking action. And well, as I always say, that's it for me. Listen and subscribe to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast on all the major podcast players that you listen to podcasts on, including iTunes, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, and even Spotify. And please leave a 5-star review if you like the show. We need those reviews to grow, and it's the easiest way to make sure that this show gets into the ears of the leaders who need to hear it.